At Pizza and Property, I hold our content to the highest level of standard possible. As a human, however, I can make mistakes, which is why I wanted to say thank you for your comments on our latest episode, recognizing the servicing issue on this week's Weekly Slice. The mistake is 100% mine, and I'm taking full responsibility for this. And due to the speed of wanting to reproduce this episode, we were unable to secure the same expert. This podcast really is everything to me, and I genuinely take on board all of your feedback in the comments and fully recognize that this show would be nothing without you, which is why I owe it to you to take full responsibility for this and correct my mistake. Moving forward, I'll be placing much more stringent checks on all content to make sure we do everything we can so this never happens again. With that in mind, my name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and you're listening to my chat with Bill Childs. Bill Childs, how are you, man?
Good, Todd. How you going?
Yeah, good, man. We're going to be talking about borrowing power, SMSF, and breaking it into 3 different sections today. Appreciate you actually putting the work in behind this one and jumping on this so quick, man, because I think there's a little bit of a difference in SMSF and borrowing property. Naturally, serviceability is going to be coming into this. And right now, we know that buying property in your SMSF can have some incredible returns, but obviously that return's really going to be pretty tied to how much you can actually borrow. So you've got 3 different incomes together, is that right?
Yeah, mate. So we've got a 90K income, a 150K income, which are both for a single applicant. And then what we've done to factor in a bit more borrowing capacity and try and get a higher valued property in the SMSF is we've actually looked at what we can do if we have 2 applicants, so a couple, and they're both earning 150K each, and they've got a 250K balance.
All right, and what have we got as the opening balance for our 90 and our 150?
They've both got 150K as an opening balance.
Got it. Okay, well, why don't we start with the 90K, and let's see how this plays out, because you've then looked at this over, the next 35 years, assuming they're starting around 30 years old to like 65 when they can touch it, is that correct?
Yeah, mate. So what we looked at was we wanted to figure out, firstly, if you have 150K in your SMSF and you're on a 90K income, firstly, can you actually borrow anything in your SMSF at all to buy a property, or do you have to wait until you've got more balance, more income, something like that?
Yep.
But what we've looked at is you can borrow. You can't borrow a lot. You can borrow around 265K if you're on a 90K income inside your SMSF. And if you got 150K worth of balance in there, basically what that means is you can purchase a property for up to $380,000.
Doable, but pretty tight.
We are pretty tight, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But 380, it's going to get you decent properties in some areas if you know where to look. A lot of people will say, there's not properties available for 380K anymore. I bought 2 properties in November for 315, 317, I think, and 345. So they're out there. You just got to know where to find them. All
right, so 380 purchase, pretty slim, but still doable. What kind of yield you're looking at here, mate?
Yeah, so if we're going for a 380 purchase, I'm factoring in that we're going to get a 380 a week rent as well. If you can find one of those properties and hold it for 35 years until you retire, that property is going to be worth $3.332 million.
And what's that factoring in as far as the growth rate? What have you used?
We've used a 6.4% growth rate, which is the national average over the last 30 years.
Pretty good. Not shooting the lights out, but it's good. What is there anything else you want to talk about with our 90K situation before we move on to the 150?
Not only is your value now 3.332 mil, but you're actually getting a rental income of $173,000 a year. So 173K today is obviously not going to be the same as 173K in 35 years, but it's probably going to still be pretty decent as a passive income in super.
It still kind of blows my mind that, like, I know 35 years away is a long time, but imagine paying $170,000 in rent every year. But it's like, I guess 30 years ago, you'd be like, imagine paying $30,000, $40,000 a year in rent.
Well, this is a lower priced property too.
That's what I mean.
Imagine what $1 million property is going to be renting for in 35 years.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So it's going to be good.
All the more reason to time in the market, not timing the market. Getting in is obviously the important factor. All right, man, what are we looking at for our 150K earner?
So 150K, we've gone with same super balance being 150. And what we're looking at is your max borrowing capacity is going to be about 370K, which means you can purchase a property for around $480,000.
Are you still leaving a little bit in the super fund as well?
Yep. So with most lenders in SMSF lending, they require you to have a 5% liquidity in the fund. So that means 5% of the debt. So if you've got a 400K debt, you're going to need to have at least $20,000 in liquidity in the fund. That can either be in cash, or a lot of them will allow you to have that in managed funds or something like that as well, stocks, whatever it is. But you need to have something left over. So you can't spend your full 150K on your deposit and your stamp duty.
Got it. Just wanted to clarify, just in case anyone's sort of following along with the numbers at home going, these don't quite add up, but that's why there's a bit left over.
That is. Yep.
Got
it.
it.
Anyway, with that 370 lend, we're going to put down 110K deposit, and we can get to a 480 purchase price with a $480 a week rent, right? In 35 years, that property, what do you reckon we're at, Todd? 35 years from 480.
I had 5 mil, roughly.
Not bad. 4.2 mil, 4.209 mil.
Okay.
In 35 years from 480. So not bad.
So either way, we're getting some great compounding because it's going at the 6.4%. But right now, what I'm really picking up from this is if you're on a lower wage, it's going to be doable, but pretty tricky. What I'm imagining now is as soon as if you go into the situation where you team up with a partner, this is when the returns are going to start really shooting the lights out. Is that correct?
They are. But to finish off on that point, if you've got that property that you bought for 480, and it's now worth 4.2 in 35 years, it's also going to be renting for $218,000 a year if it's still getting a 5% return. All
right, so obviously there's going to be running costs with this as well, but we're looking at what, 1.5% roughly?
Yeah, probably about 1.5%, mate, for stuff like your insurance, your council rates, property management fees, and that will account for some maintenance as well.
Anything else you wanted to wrap up on this one before we move into the couple scenario?
No, mate, I think that's it. I think that obviously it's just showing the power of compounding. And obviously this is at a 6.4% return. You know, if you've know exactly what you're doing and you think you can outperform that, get a 7, maybe 7.5% return, the numbers are going to be significantly more as well. We're just going off the average over the last 30 years of basically every dwelling in Australia.
Got it. Our final situation.
So they've got 300K income and they've got 250K in super. So I've gone a little bit less in the fund. We can get a max borrowing capacity of $680,000. So this means we can purchase up to $850K. Now, what I've factored in on this one is we're getting $850 rent. So it's probably not going to be a standard property. It's going to be a duplex or maybe a house and granny flat or something like that. You're going to have to put in a bit of effort to get a 5% return at that $850K purchase price because naturally, as you know, the yields come down in general as the prices go up.
Yep.
But if you can get that, which you can if you look hard enough, you're going to get in and that's going to be broken down into a deposit of 170 grand.
Yep.
You're going to have stamp duty of around 34,000 and you're going to have liquidity left in the fund of about 46K. So 35 years time, that property is worth $7.45 million.
7.45. And what's it bringing in income wise?
It'll be renting for $372,000 a year, which is $1,000 a day.
That's insane.
Can you imagine in 35 years? It's probably a fair scenario. Like this is an $850K property. That's a lot of properties in Australia, a lot and more expensive than that. Your rent's going to be over $1,000 a day.
Let's even just say, for instance, these numbers aren't quite right. The market doesn't grow at 6.4. Let's say it grows at 5 or it grows at 7.
Yeah.
The purpose of this episode is really to pull apart the borrowing capacity element to this. What is potentially possible depending on if you're on 90K, 150K, or if you're a couple with about 300K in servicing. It's going to drastically change what you can, or I guess the path that you can potentially walk down. And maybe you're on 90K and you're like, well, I'm not really too happy with that. What if I was to work a little bit of overtime for a while to get onto 100K, 120K? Again, this is about making you guys think, what's possible now and what do I actually want to achieve? Bridging the gap between those two. It's that problem that you solve that really pushes you forward as a property investor. And opening this up in SMSF, man, I think this is going to open up a lot of people's eyes as to what is potentially possible. But is there anything else you want to add to this, man?
There is also, there's a 1,000 different scenarios. You could get a higher growth rate. You could get a lower growth rate. You could get less rent, more rent, less rental growth, whatever. We've been pretty conservative with these numbers. There's also a lot of things you could do. Maybe you buy a property and then at year 10 you sell it and you buy 2 properties. So, your wage has gone up. You might be able to service more. Interest rates have come down, something like that. Borrowing capacity is more. And after 10 years, you don't end up with 1 property. You end up with 2. and then maybe another 5 years you sell one of those and you end up with 3. That's what I've seen a lot of people have done in their SMSF, because in your SMSF, you can't actually pull equity out of the property. You can't redraw equity out, which I know you know, but a lot of people get that confused. You can't pull equity out of your SMSF property to go and buy another one, but you can sell, and because the tax rate in super is very favorable, the capital gains are pretty low as a comparison to in your personal name. So it can be advantageous to, if you have a property that's done really well in your SMSF, go and sell that one, plug it back into 2 properties and get the growth on double the asset if you can service the debt. And around that piece, there is a lot of lenders that will actually allow you, as long as you can afford it by their measures, to contribute extra to your super above the minimum repayments that your employer pays, and they can use that towards servicing. So that could, depending on what you contribute, give you an extra $200,000, $300,000 a year worth of servicing, which might be the difference between 1 and 2 properties.
And out of interest, who have you used as the lender in these scenarios?
Yeah, mate. So these scenarios have been through FirstMac, who are one of the best for SMSF. There is a few, but FirstMac will allow you to lend up to 80% for a residential security, and actually 80% for a commercial security as well at times. Right. So rates, you're going to be at about 7.5%, but that's standard. Your investment in your personal name these days is mid to high 6s. So it's not a huge disparity between your personal name.
And obviously, guys, this is not financial advice. And this is the thing that always gets me with SMSF is you actually need a statement of advice. You can't just blindly do this without it. But you want to be speaking to your financial advisor. You want to be putting your expert team together correctly to make sure that you're doing what is actually right for you in your financial situation, especially if you're going to be putting in a 20% deposit, if that's a minimum that you're doing, because it's 20%, is that right, Bill?
Most of the time it is. There is at the moment actually a couple lenders that will allow up to a 90%, obviously with LMI, but that's very rare and those policies are very new. So don't rely on that. I would take that as a bonus, and I'd want to talk to obviously a broker that knows what they're doing and 100%. Suss all that out before you go and rely on it to buy a property.
Bill Childs from Limitless Lending, thank you so much for jumping on the show, mate. Always appreciate your time.
Thanks, mate. Much appreciated. I'll talk to you soon.